الله الرحمن الرحيم. يوصيكم الله في أولادكم للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين. وقال تعالى: ولكم نصف ما ترك أزواجكم إن لم يكن لهن ولد، إلى آخر الآية. وقال تعالى: تلك حدود الله ومن يطع الله ورسوله يدخله جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا وذلك الفوز العظيم. وعن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال: قال رسول الله النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: ما حق امرئ مسلم له شيء يوصي فيه يبيت ليلتين إلا ووصيته مكتوبة عنده. Respected elders and brothers, last week we discussed briefly the values of an Islamic inheritance system. What we should keep in mind to better understand the system of Islamic inheritance. So just to recap very briefly for the benefit of those who read Jumu'ah elsewhere and to remind ourselves. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has placed great emphasis on the Islamic laws of inheritance. The word of the hadith is فَإِنَّهَا نِصْفُ الْعِلْمِ. Inheritance is determined to be half of knowledge. Further on in the hadith, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentioned وَهُوَ أَوْلُ شَيْءٍ يُنْزَعُ مِنْ أُمَّتِي. This is the first thing that will be snatched from the ummah. So when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that this is the first thing and the first knowledge that will be snatched from the ummah, despite the fact that the laws of inheritance and the ayat of inheritance are clearly stipulated in the Quran, what is meant by this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets up in Surah Nisa what are the ayat of inheritance and what are the portion of heirs and so on. And obviously the Quran will never change. But so how will it be then that this is the first knowledge that will be snatched from the ummah? So number one is people will be ignorant about it. People just they won't have the knowledge of the law of Islamic inheritance. And the second manner in which this knowledge will be snatched from the ummah is that people will apply their logic. So people will discard, people will make attempts to override the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People will feel that they know better what their situation is and what their circumstances are. And accordingly, people will make wills or people will engage in laws of inheritance which are totally forbidden according to Sharia. Further on, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentioned that ta'allamu al-fara'id wa'alimu an-nas. Seek the knowledge of inheritance and teach others the laws of inheritance. So that is something that was mentioned last week. Also, very importantly to remind ourselves is when we're dealing with inheritance, we should always keep in mind that you came in this world with absolutely nothing. And you will leave with absolutely nothing. Whatever we accumulate in this world will never come with us in the cupboard. Our cupboard is a small dark room. Nothing will fit in there. Furthermore, we should also remind ourselves that this is the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah ta'ala is Alimul Khabir. Allah ta'ala is the one who knows best. Allah ta'ala is Alimul Hakim. Allah ta'ala is the most wise. So we should never engage in any activity which will have the effect of overriding the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should never engage in any activity which will result in circumventing the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even more serious, we should never ever utter any statement which is contrary to the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By uttering a statement which is contrary to the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are placing our iman at risk. Moving forward, inshallah, very briefly we'll go through some of the laws of inheritance, what the inheritance portions are for persons and individuals and so on. And inshallah next week we'll look more into detail into an Islamic way. As far as the laws of inheritance are concerned, people often want to know what there's two aspects to it. One is for each person individually. A person often wants to know, if I die, what will happen to my estate? Or rather, when I die, what will happen to my estate? So this is the one aspect that people often look at. There's also another aspect that people look at it from, and that is, should a person in my immediate family pass away, what will be the outcome as far as the laws of inheritance are concerned? What will I be entitled to, and so on? So at the very outset, you should understand there's no right to inheritance until a person passes away. When a person passes away, then obviously the rights will fall into place. So for instance, if I allow you to use a pen, and you've used your pen, you've done whatever you needed to do with the pen, when you are done with the pen, what is your responsibility? Your responsibility is to return this pen to me. I am the owner, I am the man. In the same manner, we are never the owners of anything in this world. Allah Ta'ala's name is Al-Malik. Allah Ta'ala is the owner of everything. What you are given to use in this world, you are given to use for a short space of time. We are the custodians of it. We may use it for a certain amount of time, and we may have a certain degree of decision making over it. But ultimately, the Malik and the owner is Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. When we leave this world, it needs to be returned back to the owner. Allah Ta'ala's name is Al-Malik also, and Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's name is Al-Warith, the ultimate heir. So when any person leaves this world, this belongs that we may be in custody of, or may be having a certain extent of control of, is then returned to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. As Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is there. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is Al-Warith. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala then stipulates in the Quran in Surah Nisa who this inheritance must go to. Also, another principle to keep in mind when we're dealing with inheritance is, as I said, people often like to know who my heirs will be and so on. Islamically, it is never possible to ascertain who the heirs of a person are until the person passes away, until the person is deceased. Why do we say that? Firstly, as far as our own lives are concerned, we do not know how long we will live and when we will pass away. Secondly, not one of us here is able to say with certainty that this will be the order of people passing away in my family. So people often like to believe that I'll pass away first, then my wife, then my children, or maybe my parent first, or whoever it may be. But the reality is, it is totally impossible to say with certainty that today I pass away, these will be my heirs. It's totally impossible to say that I will outlive so and so in my family. I will outlive so and so in my family. So for this reason, you can never for certain ascertain who your heirs are and what each heir's portions are from an Islamic point of view. However, there are certain ayat in the Quran Kareem, and just for purposes of our understanding, and as I said, people like to know this sort of information as to who our possible heirs are and what are their respective inheritance portions. So from an Islamic point of view, we generally break it down into three different categories. The first category of heirs that we have, who can never be disinherited, are our ascendants, in other words, our parents. So again, this is totally contrary to the legal system of inheritance, to the interstate succession act, and so on. This is the law of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. The first people who will inherit from a person, or from a deceased person, if they are still living obviously, is their parents. The minimum portion that a father or a mother will inherit from their deceased child is 1/6 each of their estate. So So in total, this could be a portion of 1/3 of the estate, which is a large portion of the estate. So this is the very minimum portion. In certain instances, the father even inherits the entire 100% of the estate. So this is always the first category of persons who will inherit, and the inheritance can never be denied. In instances where the grandparents are still living and the parents are deceased, then the grandparents will be those who inherit. So this is generally the first category of people who inherit from an Islamic point of view, by virtue of the ayah, وَلِأَبْوَيْهِ لِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا السُّدُسُ إِنْ كَانَ لَهُ وَلَدٌ. The second category of people who inherit from an Islamic point of view is the spouse. Husband may inherit from the wife, and wife may inherit from the husband. So here again we'll differentiate between a situation where the wife passes away first and a situation where the husband passes away first. Where the wife passes away first, where the female passes away first, then you need to look one step further. Did she leave behind any children or not? Where she left behind any children, in that event, the husband will inherit 25% of her estate, 1/4. In the event that a female did not leave behind any children and she's left behind a husband, then the husband will inherit 50% of her estate. That's as far as the female is concerned, the wife is concerned. In a situation where the husband passes away first, then again we need to look at whether this person, this male, had children or not. Where a person had children, then the wife will inherit 12.5% of the estate. So remember, this is the portion that most people are very interested in. What will my wife inherit when I pass away? So if you have children, then your wife will inherit 12.5% of the estate, or 1/10. Where there's no children, where the person left behind no children, then the wife will inherit 25% of the estate. And to make it a little more interesting, when a person has more than one wife, those wives will share their portion. So they either need to share 12.5% or they need to share 25% of the estate. Let them fight it out. So this is the second category. The first category being your ascendants, your parents. The second category of people who will inherit is your spouse. Obviously, for a female, her husband, and for a male, his wife or his wives, and so on. Then we get to the third category of people who inherit from an Islamic point of view, and those are obviously the children. As far as the third category is concerned, again, there are many possible scenarios. The first scenario, in a general scenario, is where a person may have both male children and female children. A person has sons and daughters. This would be the most common scenario. For this, the ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which I recited before, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. A male child will inherit twice the portion of a female child. So just to give you a very brief and simplified example of this, for instance, a woman has passed away. Her parents have already predeceased her. She has no ascendants. She has no parents. She has no grandparents. And she is survived by her husband and one son and one daughter. So where she is survived by a husband and a son and a daughter, obviously, as you mentioned, the husband will inherit 25% of the estate. There's a remainder of 75%, which must be split between the male children and the female children as per the ratio 2:1. Accordingly, the son will inherit 25%, the son will inherit 50%, and the daughter will inherit 25%. So as far as the third category is concerned, in most instances, I'd say 80 to 90% of instances, where a person has both male children and female children, then the inheritance will stop here. It won't go any further. In other words, your siblings will not come into the picture at all. In fact, where there are male children at all, the siblings do not come into play at all as far as inheritance is concerned. What happens then is, what is the position when a person is survived only by one daughter, or by only female children, 2 or 3 daughters or 4 daughters, whatever it may be? In the instance where a person is survived only by one daughter and there's no male children, this female will inherit 50% of the estate. In an instance where a person is survived by more than one daughter and no male children whatsoever, then the females, whether it is 2 daughters, whether it is 3 daughters, whether it is 4 daughters, or whatever number it may be, they will share in 2/3 or 66% of the estate. So what happens then with the remainder of the estate? Obviously, a spouse inherits some, but the spouse may be predeceased. The parents may inherit some, they may be predeceased. So then the balance of this estate will then split between the siblings of the person who has passed away. So this is very briefly to set out what are the inheritance portion in Islam. Obviously, this will take care of about 80 to 90% of cases. In complicated scenarios, obviously, the more detailed calculations that are required, and the inheritance will then go accordingly. So we've understood that this is the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, in the same ayat of inheritance, the very same ayat, the 2 ayat which set out the laws of inheritance in the Quran, يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ and وَلَكُمْ نِصْفُ مَا تَرَكَ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ إِن لَّمْ يَكُن لَّهُنَّ وَلَدٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at the end of the very same ayat, وَصِيَّةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَكِيمٌ. This is the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained, and remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all knowing, all wise. So again, we should constantly remind ourselves, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who knows better. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows our needs better. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows our circumstances better. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows our generation better. And this is the ordainment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the very next ayah, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ. These are the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَن يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا أَبَدًا وَذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ. A person who complies with the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a person who fulfills the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will be rewarded with Jannah. Will be rewarded with the gardens of Jannah, and he is a successful person. In the very next ayah, remember all this is all intertwined, all linked. وَمَن يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَهُ. A person who disobeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, specifically in these ayat, in the ayat of inheritance, in the laws of inheritance, and you have transgressed the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يُدْخِلْهُ نَارًا خَالِدًا فِيهَا أَبَدًا. This person is destined for Jahannam. So you should seek great care and exercise great caution when attending to any matters of inheritance. So what is my duty and what is more your duty? Firstly, from an individual point of view. From an individual point of view, I've recited the hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu and repeated. أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ما حق امرئ مسلم له شيء يوصي فيه يبيت ليلتين إلا ووصيته مكتوبة عنده. It is not permissible for a Muslim to pass 2 nights and he does not have his will beside him. So all of us should introspect. Have I complied with this or not? The hadith has given us 2 nights. So this interpretation, you have your broad interpretation and you have your narrow interpretation. Your broad and your generous interpretation will allow you to trust 3 days without a will, and after that it would be a sin. Your narrow interpretation would mean that you shouldn't even pass 1 day without a will. So from each and every person's perspective, every mukallaf, baligh Muslim should question myself, do I have a will or do I not have a will? People often make very lame excuses. People say, I have nothing. The hadith doesn't say if you have any belongings or not. It is fard for every Muslim, every mukallaf Muslim, every valid Muslim or Muslimah to have a will. And you should make sure you have it. Obviously, we live in South Africa, where the laws are not Islamic laws. And the laws of inheritance are not Islamic laws. We have what we call the Wills Act, the Interstate Succession Act. And if we do not have our wills, then our inheritance will be distributed according to the law of interstate succession. And this is totally un-Islamic. And who is responsible for it? Me. Why? It was my duty to make sure I had a will. And I did not fulfill my duty of having a will. So this is the one aspect from an individual. The second aspect from an individual point of view is as a possible heir. So obviously we may at certain times in our life become entitled to inheritance by being an heir of a deceased person, whether it may be from parents, whether it may be from children, whether it may be from grandparents, whoever it may be. So as an heir, do I make sure that I have not taken more than what is my right of inheritance? And it's, in fact, from an Islamic point of view, the Islamic value system, in the event that I may be cut short, I should try and forgive the next person. So firstly, make sure that you never take more than what is rightful for you. This is as far as the individual is concerned. As far as an executor is concerned, many of us may happen to be executors of people's wills. What is our duty? Our duty is to fulfill the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to fulfill the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So first and foremost, inshallah, if the will is all according to Sharia, everything above board, alhamdulillah. Your task is very easy. It is your duty now to fulfill the will and to make sure everything goes on Islamic. However, many instances where the will is not Islamic, what is your duty? Remember, it is not permissible for you to fulfill the will to fulfill a will which is contrary to Allah, to the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So where a will is done incorrectly, you should get the heirs together, enter into some form of a redistribution agreement and so on. But it is not permissible to enforce the wishes of a person passing away, which circumvents and which overrides the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is your duty. Thirdly, mashallah, many professionals that we see here, lawyers, accountants, and so on, we often happen to be the people drafting wills for our clients and so on. What is your responsibility and what is your duty? Are you allowed to draft a will contrary to the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do you know what you are engaging in? تعاونوا على البر والتقوى ولا تعاونوا على الإثم والعدوان واتقوا الله إن الله شديد العقاب. We should assist one another in promoting good. We are not allowed to assist one another in promoting evil, in committing acts of sin. And again, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for verily the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very severe. So as people who often draft rules for clients and so on, are we advising them correctly? Are we advising them that the will should be in accordance with the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or are we advising them that it's your assets, you can do with it what you like? And that is the attitude of Fir'aun and Haman and Qarun. What was the attitude? إِنَّمَا أُوتِيتُهُ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي. Whatever I gained through my expertise, and through my knowledge, and through my genius. Whereas everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everything must return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will decide who must get what portion. So as professionals, do we then encourage people to fulfill the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or do we allow and do we go further and assist people to draft rules which are incorrect? My humble advice to you, my dear brothers, do not forego your akhirah for somebody else's dunya. For a few reigns of this world, do not forego your akhirah. Remember, this is the last transaction of your life. And again, when you close your eyes, absolutely nothing matters. nothing that you accumulated in this world matters. All that will come with you is your amal and your actions. We end with this on this note, inshallah. Next week we'll go into a little bit of detail of an Islamic will, what's allowed in an Islamic will, and what is not allowed in an Islamic will, and what we should take off in our lifetime.